What started as a cruel joke turned into a breathtaking moment that changed everyone's life forever when the quiet maid's first piano note revealed a hidden world of talent and hope. Maria had been working in the Henderson mansion for a little over 2 years. Every morning, she arrived before sunrise, wearing the same neat gray uniform and her hair tied back in a bun. She moved quietly through the large rooms, dusting shelves, wiping windows, and making sure everything looked perfect before the family even woke up. Was always polite, never spoke unless spoken to, and did her work without a complaint. In a place filled with noise, chatter, and luxury, Maria was like a silent shadow. The Hendersons were a wealthy family who lived in a grand old house just outside of London. The mansion was the kind that tourists stopped to take pictures of. Tall white pillars, a huge fountain in the driveway, and wide stone steps leading up to a pair of heavy oak doors. Inside, every room was decorated with expensive furniture, paintings in golden frames, and shelves full of books no one ever read. In the corner of the drawing room stood a beautiful black grand piano. It had been in the family for generations. Polished every week but rarely played, Maria noticed the piano often. She passed it every day while dusting or mopping the floor. Sometimes, when no one was around, she would pause and let her fingers hover over the keys, never touching, only remembering. But she never stayed long. If anyone saw her staring at the piano, they would find it strange. The maid the Hendersons had 3 children, but only one still lived at home. Emily, the youngest, was in her early 20s. She was in university but spent most of her time at home, inviting friends over, throwing little get-togethers, and living as if the mansion was her personal playground. Her friends were mostly from rich families, too young, loud, full of jokes, and always talking about who wore what or who was dating whom. Maria often worked while Emily and her friends laughed in the next room. She heard their voices there. Jokes, and sometimes even their complaints about her. They didn't say them directly to her, but Maria wasn't deaf. She heard them calling her the ghost maid or Miss Silent behind her back. She never reacted. She had learned long ago that silence was safer than words. One Saturday evening, Emily hosted a small gathering at the house. It wasn't a huge party, just about a dozen friends eating, drinking, and playing games in the parlor. Maria was cleaning up in the next room when she heard loud laughter and the sound of someone playing random, messy notes on the piano. Then came the teasing voices. "Hey, someone get the maid. See if she can play better than this," one boy shouted, followed by a round of giggles. Emily laughed too. "Maria probably thinks the piano is a table. She's never touched it in her life," she said. Maria heard every word. She didn't stop wiping the dining table. Her hands moved carefully in slow, practiced strokes, but her heart tightened just a little. Not from anger. From something else. A memory. Suddenly, one of the boys stepped into the dining room. He was holding a glass of wine and smiling as if he were part of a comedy show. "Maria," he said with a playful tone, "come in here a moment. We want you to play something for us." Maria turned and looked at him. She didn't speak right. Away. Her eyes were calm, unreadable. "You want me to play the piano?" she asked softly. He laughed. "Yes, just for fun. Come on, don't be shy. Give us a little concert." Behind him, others were laughing too. A girl clapped her hands. "Yes, Maria. Show us your musical side." Maria smiled gently. It was the kind of smile that gave nothing away, and she shook her head politely. "I'm sorry. I don't know how," she said. "Oh, come on," the boy said, stepping closer. "Just one note. We won't laugh. Promise." But Maria, already, knew better. They weren't asking because they believed she could play. They were asking because they didn't. "No, thank you," she said quietly, then turned back to her work. The boy rolled his eyes and walked back into the parlor. "She's too shy," he told the others. "Or too scared," someone else said. The laughter picked up again. But it didn't reach Maria. She had closed the door in her mind. That night, after everyone had left and the house was finally quiet, Maria walked past the piano one more time. The lights were dim and the only sound was the faint ticking of the old grandfather clock. She stopped in front of the piano and looked at it for a long time. Her hand reached out, almost on its own, and touched the smooth wood. She didn't press any keys. She just stood there, remembering there had been a time many years ago when this was her life. Music, not mops. Applause, not orders. But those days were gone, long gone. Still, the memory was strong. She remembered the stage lights, the grand concert halls, the weight of the piano keys beneath her fingers, and the way her room would fall silent when she played her first note. She remembered how people used to close their eyes when she played, how they would wipe tears from their cheeks when she finished. Now, she wiped dust off furniture. She pulled her hand away and turned back toward the hallway. She had an early morning ahead. The family was hosting a brunch. More guests, more messes, more silence. Maria lived alone in a small flat just outside the city. It was a quiet, simple place with very little furniture. But in the corner stood a tiny old keyboard. It had only 61 keys and a missing volume knob, but it worked. Late at night, when she couldn't sleep, she would play for a few minutes. Nothing fancy. Just soft melodies. Pieces she remembered from her past. Pieces that reminded her she hadn't completely disappeared. Her neighbors sometimes paused to listen through the wall, thinking someone on the radio was playing. But they never knew it was the maid from the Henderson mansion. The next few days passed normally. Maria continued her work without fuss. Emily and her friends talked about the next party they were planning. The piano remained untouched, like a decoration. No one brought up the joke again. To them, it had been a moment of fun, nothing serious. But for Maria, it had reopened a door she had tried to keep shut for years. Sometimes, she found herself humming softly while cleaning. Her fingers tapped invisible notes on countertops. She moved through the house like a quiet symphony, each step full of rhythm. She had never told anyone about her past. Not the Hendersons, not her neighbors, not even the friendly cashier at the grocery store, who always asked how her day was going. It was too painful to explain how everything had been taken away in an instant. The war in her homeland had not only destroyed cities, it had broken families, silenced dreams, and forced artists like her to disappear into survival. Now, she was just a maid. That's what the world saw. That's what the Hendersons saw.
I'm dead.
That's what the guests saw when they laughed and pointed toward the piano. But deep inside, Maria still held on to that part of herself. The part that had once made people rise to their feet in applause. It's the part that could still turn silence into music. She didn't need anyone to believe it. She knew who she was. She had just forgotten how it felt to be seen, and soon, without meaning to, would remind everyone exactly who she had been, and still was without ever having to say a single word. Years before Maria ever stepped foot in the Henderson mansion, her life was full of music, light, and applause. She wasn't always a maid. Once she had been someone people clapped for, someone people admired. Her real name wasn't even Maria. It was Marika Iliv, and in her country, that name had once been known across cities and concert halls. But life had a way of changing everything, even names. She was born in a small town in Eastern Europe, in a house filled with music. Her father was a violinist, and her mother a schoolteacher who sang in the church choir. They weren't rich, but they were happy. Music was always playing in their home in the old radio from the cracked speakers in the kitchen, or from her father's violin in the evenings. When Marika was 5, she climbed onto a piano bench for the first time. It belonged to a neighbor who gave piano lessons, and one afternoon when her mother was visiting, little Marika wandered into the room. Her fingers found the keys, and she pressed one. A single note rang out, and her heart jumped. From that moment, she was hooked. By the time she was 10, everyone in the town knew that Marika had something special. Her fingers moved like they were born for the piano. She didn't just play the notes, she told stories with them. Sad ones, joyful ones. Ones that made people close their eyes and forget their problems for a few minutes. A local music teacher took her in without charging a single penny. He believed in her. He said she had the hands of Chopin and the soul of a poet. When she turned 14, she won her first national competition. Her parents cried when they saw her on the front page of the town's newspaper, holding a gold medal with a shy smile at 17. She left home to study at a conservatory in the capital city. It was her dream, She practiced for hours every day, playing until her wrists hurt, learning everything she could about classical music. She read biographies of great pianists and studied old recordings. Every time she stepped onto a stage, she gave her entire heart to the piano. Soon, invitations started coming in. Small concerts at first, then bigger ones. People began to recognize her name. They came not just to hear her music, but to feel it. There was something about the way she played, so full of emotion, so deep, that made audiences sit in complete silence, hanging on every note. Marika traveled to different cities, sometimes even outside her country, to perform. She didn't make a lot of money, but she didn't care. She had a suitcase, a coat, and her music. That was enough. We're proud. Every time she came home, they asked her to play her newest piece. Her father would close his eyes, and her mother would always have tears in hers by the time Marika was done. When she was 26, she met Ivan, a kind and thoughtful cello player. They met at a music festival, and something clicked between them immediately. He didn't just love music, he understood her silence, her moods, her need to be alone before a concert. They were married a year later, in a small ceremony, with only family and a few close friends. For their wedding gift, Ivan gave her a beautiful piano pendant on a silver chain. She wore it every day after that. Together, they made a quiet life filled with music. They lived in a modest flat, taught private lessons to students, and performed together whenever they could. Sometimes, they didn't need words. They would just sit side by side, Marika on the piano, Ivan with his cello, and speak to each other through the notes. It was a simple, beautiful life. But then the war began. It started slowly. Protests, news reports, rumors of conflict in the borders. Then came the soldiers, the checkpoints, the closed roads. Concerts were canceled, students stopped coming, and fear filled the streets. At first, Marika and Ivan tried to stay hopeful. It will pass, they told each other. Music will always survive, but it didn't pass. It got worse. Their apartment building was hit during a bombing. They lost everything except for a small bag of clothes and her pendant, which she had been wearing. Ivan was injured, his left hand crushed by falling bricks. He never played the cello again. For months, they lived in a shelter with other families. Food was limited, and nights were cold. The only sound in that shelter was crying, children missing their homes, mothers praying quietly, and old men whispering names of lost ones. Music disappeared from their lives like light from the sky. Ivan's injury got worse. With no proper hospital nearby and no medicine, he developed a fever. Marika stayed beside him every night, holding his hand, begging him to stay.
One morning.
He didn't wake up, just like that. The person she had made music with, built a life with, and loved with all her heart was gone. Marika didn't cry at first. She just sat there, holding his hand, numb. Something inside her broke that day, a string that had held her soul together. She buried him behind the shelter in a shallow grave, with only his broken cello case as a marker. She didn't play music. Again, for a long time, after Ivan's death, Marika had no reason to stay. She had no family left, no home, and no future in a place filled with smoke and silence. Like many others, she joined a group of refugees heading west, hoping to find safety. The journey was long and dangerous. She walked through cold nights, crossed rivers, and waited in endless lines at borders. Along the way, she stopped using her real name. Marika Ilove was a name that belonged to another life. She became Maria, just Maria. Eventually, she made it to England, a country she'd only seen in books. She was given a temporary shelter in London, and with the help of a local charity, she began to look for work. At first she worked in kitchens, washing dishes for hours. Then she cleaned offices, then homes. She never told anyone about her past. People only saw her quiet nature and strong work ethic. That was enough for them. When she was offered a job at the Henderson Mansion, she took it. It paid better, and the house was clean, warm, and safe. That was all she needed. She didn't care about the expensive paintings or the large garden. She didn't care that the family barely looked at her. What mattered was that she had peace. But inside, her music still lived. It had just been buried under layers of pain and loss. Sometimes, late at night, she would sit on her bed and hum the melodies she once played. They came to her like dreams, soft, delicate, and full of memories. She couldn't afford a real piano, but one day, while walking past a charity shop, she saw a second-hand keyboard in the window. It was old and dusty, with a few missing buttons, but it was cheap. She used a week's wages to buy it. She carried it home in her arms like it was something sacred. That night, she plugged it in and touched the keys for the first time in years. Her hands trembled. She didn't know if she could still play. But when she pressed the first note, it was like the air around her changed. Her fingers began to move, slowly at first, then with confidence.
The music came rushing back, not
just the notes, but the emotions, the memories, the life she thought she had lost. She cried as she played. Not because she was sad, but because she remembered who she was. After that, she played for a few minutes every night. Just for herself. It wasn't a concert. There was no audience. But it healed her in small ways. Her neighbors sometimes paused at their doors, listening. Few even asked her if she was playing a recording. No, she said with a gentle smile. Just something old. At the Henderson mansion, she stayed quiet. She cleaned the piano, but never touched the keys. She heard Emily's friends joke and didn't respond. She knew what they thought of her. To them, she was just the maid, a background figure, silent worker. But that didn't bother her anymore. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She wasn't looking for applause. Still, every now and then, when she was alone in the grand living room, she would pause by the piano. She would imagine sitting down and playing something soft, something true. She would imagine their faces changing, the surprise, the silence, the disbelief. But then she would shake the thought away and return to her work, because that life, the life of Marika Ilov, was over, or so she believed. What Maria didn't know was that fate had a strange way of bringing music back. Sometimes, even when you've lost everything, one small moment can change everything again. And soon, the same people who saw her as nothing would hear something that would make them see her completely differently. But for now, she continued her quiet life, holding her past, like a secret melody, waiting for the moment someone would finally listen. The rain fell softly on the windows of the Henderson mansion that Saturday evening. The sky outside was dark, and the wind whistled through the trees. Inside the warm house, lights glowed from every room, and soft music played from speakers in the hallway. The fireplace in the drawing room gave off a golden light that danced on the walls. Emily Henderson, dressed in a red velvet dress, moved through the room, greeting her friends with laughter and hugs. It was another weekend gathering, something Emily was known for among her university friends. She called them small dinner parties, but they always turned into loud, cheerful nights with snacks, drinks, jokes, and music. Her parents were away again traveling in France for some business meeting, so Emily had the house to herself. That meant freedom. She had invited about 12 people, most of them students from her university, all dressed in stylish clothes, their voices full of energy. Maria, as always, worked quietly in the background. She had set the table earlier. That day, arranged the flowers in the hallway, lit the candles, and prepared the drinks. She was now cleaning the last few dishes in the kitchen, her hands moving rhythmically, her face calm and unreadable. She could hear the voices from the drawing room, laughter, footsteps, the clink of glasses, and music from someone's phone speaker. Emily's parties followed a pattern. They always started with snacks, then moved on to silly games, and finally ended with someone trying to sing or play the piano badly just to make everyone laugh. Maria had seen it all before. She didn't expect anything different tonight. The grand piano stood silently in the corner of the drawing room, near the tall windows. It was an elegant black instrument, polished weekly by Maria herself. Though it had not been tuned in a long time, it still looked perfect. To the guests, it was more like a piece of expensive decoration than an instrument. No one really knew how to play it, but they loved pretending. It made them feel special, even if their fingers produced only clumsy sounds. As the night went on, the group began to relax more. Drinks were flowing, jokes got louder, and someone suggested they play a game of truth or dare. The group sat in a circle near the fireplace, laughing each time someone picked a silly dare or answered a juicy question. It was during one of these turns that the conversation shifted. "Okay, Tom," said a girl with curly hair and a wide smile. "Your turn. Truth or dare?" Tom, a tall guy with messy brown hair and a mischievous look in his eyes, grinned. "Dare," he said. The girl looked around the room for an idea. Her eyes stopped at the piano. "I dare you to play a full song on the piano." Everyone burst into laughter. Tom rolled his eyes. "You want me to destroy the ears of this room?" "Yes," someone shouted. "Come on, Mozart." Tom stood up, walked to the piano, and sat down like a professional musician. He flipped his imaginary cape and cracked his fingers like a drama actor. Then, with a deep fake breath, he began to bang the keys randomly. The sounds were loud, messy, and completely without rhythm. He was playing nonsense, and that was the joke. People were laughing so hard that one of them nearly dropped their drink. The noise echoed through the house. "Bravo," Emily shouted with a laugh. "A true artist." Then Tom turned around, still seated at the piano, and looked at Maria, who had just walked through the room to clear an empty plate. "Hey, Maria," he said loudly, pointing at the piano. "Your turn. You want to give it a try?" The room suddenly quieted for a second, just enough for everyone to hear. Emily laughed nervously. "She's not going to play, Tom. Be serious." "No, really," he said, his voice playful. "Come on, Maria. Just one song, even one note. We all played badly. See what you've got." Some people chuckled. Others just stared at Maria, curious to see what she'd do. Maria paused near the door. Her hands were still holding the plate, but her eyes moved slowly to the piano. It had been so long since someone had said her name in connection with music. So long since anyone had looked at her like she was more than just the maid. Emily raised her eyebrows. "She doesn't play," she said flatly. "She's not like that." But Tom kept smiling. "We're just playing around. No harm in trying." Maria put the plate down on a nearby table. Her heart was beating faster than usual, but her face stayed calm. She walked slowly toward the piano, her footsteps quiet on the floor. The room fell into silence. People expected something awkward, maybe even funny. No one expected anything beautiful. In fact, most of them were just waiting to giggle when she played something wrong. She stood beside the piano for a second, then sat down. Her back was straight, her hands resting gently on her lap. She looked at the keys like she was greeting an old friend after years apart. Emily folded her arms, a small smirk on her face. She leaned over to one of her friends and whispered something. The friend nodded and smiled. A few people exchanged looks, waiting for the embarrassment they thought would follow. Maria took a deep breath. Her fingers rose slowly and hovered over the keys. She could feel the dust, the coldness of the ivory. Then, with the softest touch, she pressed a single key. The sound rang out clear and pure. It was just one note. But it was full. It was rich. It wasn't loud or flashy. It was the kind of note that had depth of tone that filled the air and demanded silence without asking for it. The room froze. Then came the next note, and the next. A gentle melody began to rise. Her hands moved with grace, her fingers dancing over the keys as if they remembered everything. Each chord she played built a world around her, a world of sorrow, beauty, and strength. She didn't play a famous piece. It was something of her own, something born from years of silence and buried pain. It was a slow, haunting tune, with deep lows and gentle highs. Like a story being told without words. Nobody laughed. Nobody moved. People who had never listened to classical music in their lives found themselves drawn into the sound. Emily's smile faded. She stared at Maria, her expression changing from amusement to confusion, then to shock. She had known Maria for 2 years, but had never once guessed this woman had such power in her. The notes poured out like rain. Music filled every corner of the room. Maria's eyes were half closed, her face calm, but her hands spoke volumes. They told of love, loss, war, and hope. They told of quiet suffering and silent strength. It felt like time had stopped. When she finally lifted her hands from the keys, there was silence. A long, full silence. Not the kind that came from awkwardness, but the kind that came when something sacred had just happened. No one knew what to say. A glass was still held in midair. A girl had tears on her cheek. Even Tom, who had dared her to play, looked stunned. He opened his mouth but said nothing. Maria stood up quietly and gave a small nod. Then, without another word, she walked out of the room and returned to the kitchen. The guests sat still for a while, each of them wrapped in their own thoughts. It was as if the entire night had changed in one moment. The laughter, the teasing, all of it, faded behind that one song. Emily finally spoke, her voice soft. "Who is she?" No one answered. Later that night, when everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, Emily sat by the piano. Her fingers touched the keys gently, but nothing happened. No sound came close to what she had heard before. She stared at the seat where Maria had sat and played like a master. A maid, who had moved like a forgotten spirit all these years, had just shown them something they would never forget. Upstairs, Maria sat alone in her small room. Her hands were still tingling. She looked down at them, the same hands that had once performed in grand concert halls, now wrinkled and tired from years of cleaning. But they still had it. The music was still there, alive. She didn't smile or cry. She just sat there in silence, listening to the last echoes of her own melody playing softly in her mind. She hadn't planned to play that night. She didn't do it for attention or applause. She did it because something inside her said it was time. Time to let the world hear her again. Time to remind herself who she was. And now, everything was about to change. The next morning, the Henderson mansion woke up to a quiet but noticeable change. The air seemed heavier with questions, and the usual routine felt different. Maria went about her cleaning as usual, but inside, she felt a strange mix of relief and nervousness. The night before had been unexpected. She had not meant to play, not meant to reveal that part of herself. But once she started, it was impossible to stop. Something deep inside her had spoken through the piano, and it felt like a small but powerful piece of her past had finally returned. Emily. Henderson, meanwhile, was restless. She couldn't shake the memory of Maria's playing. All morning, she found herself thinking about that music, so delicate, so full of emotion, so unexpected. It was hard to believe that the quiet maid she saw every day was capable of such talent. She replayed the notes in her mind, trying to understand how she had missed it all these years. By midday, Emily made up her mind. She needed to know more. She walked toward the kitchen where Maria was scrubbing the counter, her sleeves rolled up, her face calm and distant. Emily cleared her throat gently. "Maria," she said, trying to keep her voice casual, "can we talk for a minute?" Looked up, surprised but composed. She nodded and wiped her hands on a cloth. Emily hesitated for a moment, then spoke carefully about last night. "I didn't know you could play like that. I mean, you never told us." Maria's eyes flickered with something unreadable. "Don't usually talk about it," she said softly. Emily nodded. "But why? Why keep it hidden?" Maria looked away for a moment, then back at Emily.
"Because sometimes people don't want to see the truth," she said.
"They want you to be small, quiet, and invisible. It's easier that way." Emily frowned. "That's not right." Maria smiled sadly. "Maybe, but it's how it is." Emily was quiet. She realized she had never thought about Maria's life beyond her work as a maid. The idea that Maria had a whole world inside her, a world of music and pain, was new and surprising. "I'm sorry," Emily said quietly. "I never wanted to make you feel invisible." Maria shook her head. "It's not your fault." "I never told anyone. I was afraid." Emily sat down on a nearby chair. "Afraid of what?" Maria took a deep breath. Then, slowly, she began to share her story. Not the whole past, but pieces of it. She told Emily about the piano lessons as a child, about the music competitions and the concerts. She spoke of Ivan, her husband, and the war that took him away. She told of her journey to England, the loss, and how music had been her way of surviving. Emily listened, wide-eyed. She felt as if she were discovering a hidden treasure. Maria's story was full of sadness, yes, but also strength and hope. It was nothing like the life of a simple maid. When Maria finished, Emily sat in silence for a moment. "Why didn't you keep playing?" "'Cause the world stopped listening," Maria said. "Because sometimes the music inside you is too loud for others to hear, and because I was afraid to hope." Emily reached out and took Maria's hand. "Maybe it's time to let the world hear again." Maria looked at her hand in Emily's and nodded slowly. Word of Maria's talent began to spread quietly through the mansion. It started with Emily telling a few close friends about what she had heard. They were amazed and wanted to hear Maria play again. Slowly, more people became curious, but Maria was hesitant. The fear of being judged, misunderstood, or pitied held her back. She had survived by hiding, and now the spotlight felt strange and scary. One afternoon, Emily found Maria sitting in the drawing room, fingers resting on the piano keys. "Would you play for me?" Emily asked softly. Maria smiled, a little shy. "Just a little," she said. She began to play, and the music filled the room. This time, the tune was brighter, lighter, a hint of hope in the melody. Emily closed, her eyes letting the sound wash over her. She realized that Maria's music was not just beautiful, it was healing. Inspired, Emily asked if she could invite a few neighbors to hear Maria play. Maria agreed, though nervously. The evening of the small gathering arrived. A dozen people sat in the drawing room, listening in silence as Maria's fingers told their stories. The response was overwhelming. People were moved by her music and by the story Emily shared about Maria's journey. The guests applauded, many with tears in their eyes. After that night, more invitations followed. Emily helped Maria contact a local community center that hosted music nights for newcomers and refugees. Maria began to play there, slowly building confidence. She met other musicians, some amateurs, some professionals, who encouraged her to perform. For the first time in years, Maria felt like she belonged somewhere. Back at the mansion, the Henderson family's attitude began to change. Mr. Henderson, a busy businessman, overheard one of Emily's conversations about Maria's talent. He asked to meet her. When Maria played for him, he was silent for a long time afterward. Then he smiled and said, "You have a gift, Maria. Don't hide it." Mrs. Henderson, too, invited Maria to teach piano to their youngest daughter, Lily. It was the first time Maria entered a room at the mansion not as a maid, but as a teacher. The bond between Maria and the family deepened. Emily's friends respected her more, not just as a maid, but as a person with passion and talent. Maria was no longer invisible, but it wasn't easy. Old fears lingered. Some people still saw her only as a maid. Some whispered behind her back. Some doubted her abilities. Maria learned to face these challenges with quiet dignity. Each time she played, she reminded herself that music was her truth, stronger than any judgment. She also discovered that sharing her story helped others. At the community center, she met refugees who had lost everything but found hope through music. She taught children who had never touched a piano before. She helped people heal, just as music had healed her. With each passing day, Maria's world grew larger. She found joy in simple moments. A child's smile after learning a new song, a neighbor's hug, the sound of rain on the window as she played. Her music became more than notes. It became a bridge between worlds, between past and present pain and hope. One evening, after a long day of teaching, Maria sat by the piano, feeling tired but happy. She looked out the window at the stars and whispered, "Thank you, Ivan." She remembered her husband not with sadness, but with gratitude for the love they shared and the music they created together. Maria realized that life could break you, but it could also rebuild you, piece by piece. And now, in this small corner of London, she was ready to build a new life, a life filled with music, courage, and new beginnings. Life continued to change for Maria in ways she never expected. After the first night when she played the piano and stunned everyone, her world slowly began to open up, like a flower blooming after a long winter. The walls that had kept her silent and hidden started to fall away, brick by brick, note by note. Maria, the quiet maid who had lived in the shadows, was becoming Maria, the musician, the teacher, and the storyteller through her music. The early days were not easy. She first agreed to play in front of others outside the Henderson mansion. Her hands trembled with nervousness. Every time she sat at the piano, memories of her past flooded her mind. She remembered the concerts, the applause, the joy of music that had once filled her life before the war, took everything away. The faces of strangers in the audience blurred with those from long ago. Sometimes the pain was almost too much to bear, but Maria's love for music was stronger. It was the one thing that kept her alive during the darkest times, and now it was the key to a new life. She practiced every day, slowly rebuilding her confidence and skill. She taught herself new pieces, learned new styles, and even began to compose her own music again, music that told her story, her pain, and her hope. Emily stayed by her side through it all. The friendship between the young university student and the maid grew deeper and more meaningful. Emily helped Maria arrange performances, invited more people to listen, and supported her whenever she doubted herself. Emily's belief in Maria's talent was like a light that guided her through the dark moments. The community center where Maria began playing regularly became a second home. It was a place filled with people from all over the world, each carrying their own stories of loss and survival. Maria connected with many refugees who had fled war and hardship, just like she had. Together, they found comfort in music and in each other's company. Maria also met other musicians at the center. Some were professional artists, while others were amateurs who played for fun. They encouraged her to join local concerts and music festivals. At first, Maria was hesitant. She had never imagined she would stand on stage again, let alone be invited to perform. One night, after much encouragement, she agreed to play at a small local festival. The hall was packed with people of all ages, sitting quietly, waiting for the music to begin. Maria walked onto the stage, dressed simply but with a quiet dignity. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady as she played. The room was filled with a music so rich and full of feeling that many in the audience wiped tears from their eyes. It was as if Maria's soul was speaking through the piano, telling a story of heartbreak, courage, and hope. When she finished, the applause was loud and long. People stood to cheer, and some even came forward to shake her hand. That night changed everything. Maria realized she had not lost her place in the world. She was not just a maid or a survivor. She was a true artist. Experience gave her a new sense of purpose. Back at the Henderson mansion, the family's respect for Maria grew beyond words. Mr. Henderson, who had always been distant and busy, took time to speak with her. "You have a gift that deserves to be shared," he said kindly. "We are proud of you." Mrs. Henderson invited Maria to teach piano lessons regularly to their daughter Lily and other children in their neighborhood. It was the first time Maria felt truly recognized for her talent, not just her work as a maid. Teaching brought her joy and fulfillment. She loved watching the children's faces light up. When they learned a new song or played their first piece, Maria's story began to spread beyond the mansion and the community center. A local newspaper heard about the maid who could play beautiful music and wanted to write an article about her. Maria was nervous but agreed. The article told the story of her life, from a young girl with dreams of music to a refugee who lost everything to a woman who found her voice again through the piano. The story touched many hearts. People sent letters of support and invitations to perform. Some offered scholarships and opportunities to study music further. Maria was overwhelmed but grateful. For the first time, she felt like her life had meaning beyond survival. Despite all the success and recognition, Maria remained humble and kind. She never forgot the hard times or the people who helped her along the way. She continued to work at the mansion, not because she had to, but because she cared for the family who had become her second home. Her relationship with Emily deepened into a strong friendship. They shared dreams and fears, laughter and tears. Emily often joked that Maria was the most talented person she had ever met. It's not just because of her music, but because of her courage and heart. One cold winter evening, Maria received a letter from her homeland. It was from a distant relative who had heard about her through a friend. The letter spoke of old memories, family news, and hope to reconnect. Maria read the letter many times, her eyes filling with tears. The past had not forgotten her, and maybe it was time for her to face it fully. With Emily's support, Maria began planning a trip back to her country. It was a journey filled with mixed emotions, excitement, fear, hope, and sadness. She wanted to visit the places she once knew, to honor the memories of Ivan, and to find peace. Before she left, Maria organized a concert at the community center to say goodbye. The night was full of warmth and love. Friends and neighbors gathered to listen, celebrate, and send her off with good wishes. When Maria played that final concert before her journey, the music was different. It was joyful and sad, full of memories and dreams. The notes soared like a bird flying free. After she returned home, Maria's story continued to inspire people. She became a symbol of hope for many, proof that no matter how hard life hits you, there is always a way back. Her music bridged worlds, bringing people together and healing old wounds. Maria's journey from maid to musician was not just about talent. It was about courage, resilience, and the power of believing in yourself. It was about never letting the world's judgments define you. And most of all, it was about the magic that happens when someone dares to share their true self. In the end, Maria's music was more than sound. It was a gift, a light shining through the darkness, reminding everyone who heard it that beauty and strength can be found in the most unexpected places. And so, the maid who once was invited to play as a joke became a beacon of hope and inspiration to all who knew her story.